Good afternoon, and welcome to the launch of our Adaptix 3D orthopedic imaging system. My name is Conrad Dirks. I'm the Director of Product Management here at Adaptix. I'm speaking to you today from our socially distanced Zoom boxes in Oxford in the UK, along with my colleague, Dr. Steve Wells, who is our VP of Technology, and Mark Evans, who is the founder and CEO of Adaptix. We are particularly delighted to be joined by Dr. Sian Phillips, who is a consultant radiologist at the CTM University Health Board in Wales, and is also Associate Dean and Head of School for Radiology, Health Education and Improvement. Now, in a moment, Mark will run you through a brief presentation before Steve shows the product in operation, and then we'll have a time of Q&A. Now, we would love this Q&A to be as interactive as possible, and we're using Slido to help that. If you've not used Slido before, it's super simple. Just go to sli.do in a browser, on your phone or a computer, and enter the code Adaptix, that's ADAPTIX, all lowercase, and then you can say hello and ask us a question. With no further ado, let me now hand over to Mark.
So thank you very much for giving us your time to listen to what you're doing at Adaptix, and I hope you'll be very excited to see what we've got to show. What we're basically doing is replacing 2D X-ray with 3D X-ray in the form of DT, in a form that can travel to the point of care and be with a patient. So why are we doing this? Well, the key focus is the patient, the payer, and the physician, and improving the care from their perspective. So if we think about the use case where quite often 2D is the first imaging diagnostic, it's not unusual for there to be some challenges along the way that may result in a CT scan, or possibly even a miss resulting in correction or even litigation. Our objective is to reduce the degree to which that occurs. So in the middle, you see a 3D imaging device that we bring to the market for orthopedic. On the left, you see a 2D of a human cadaver. On the right, you see one of our images going through the stack of DT slices. Now, why does this matter? Well, anyone who's played rugby will tell you that there won't be a stranger to the emergency department. And quite often it takes several 2D images to find a fracture or potentially rule one out. We see a future where 3D is at the earlier stage in the diagnostic cycle. And instead of having multiple 2D images, 1 or 2 DT images are required, which allow you to identify the fracture better than you would otherwise. So where are we? Well, we've taken our 3D imaging system through to the Royal Surrey County Hospital to make use of the radiation protection service based there. And here you can see the phantom imaging we've done. And while we're doing that, we've confirmed that the imaging device offers marginally more dose than a normal 2D image, and the other characteristics such as skin bone, etc., are just at least as safe. So we've also started to conduct cadaver imaging. Here you see a foot acquired at St. Peter's Hospital. On the left, you see a 2D. On the right, we're now scrolling through one of our DT. Note the very clear separation of the joints in the foot, and clearly much better there than the overlapping bones that you can see on the 2D examination. So where are we? Well, that orthopedic system is being integrated by Pausch. So we're basically piggybacking on their 90-year history of providing high-quality medical imaging systems. CE and FDA filings are expected in Q3 21, and the system will be sold through the existing distribution network of Pausch and Marvig, that's Pausch's parent. So the target markets for the ortho system start off with minor injuries unit, urgent care centres, ambulatory surgical units, and then emergency departments and fracture clinics. Long term, we hope that they'll be deployed at sports injury clinics, primary care, and even potentially on an ambulance. Well, that's all very well. Where do we go from there? Well, obviously, what we're hoping to do is take 3D imaging at the point of care to the emergency department, and also to the ICU in the form of 3D chest imaging at the bedside to help clinicians better identify locations of lines and veins, edema, and other such examples. So what's the difference we add? Well, it's a digital source. It's a multitude of small emitters, and we switch between them electronically, allowing a very fast acquisition, but also enhanced Z resolution relative to a single axis DT. There's no moving parts, which allows it to be cheaper. And that gives us the focus on portability, taking radiology to the patient at the point of care, to displace 2D X-ray, to help the clinician get it right first time and increase that diagnostic accuracy. We're not aiming to replace CT. What we are aiming to do is to displace that 2D image. And in doing so, work with the industry to develop not just new device concepts, but also new business models enabled by our low-cost device. So Steve is now going to take you through a demo that we recorded earlier on today. And thank you very much for your time, and we look forward to answering your questions later on. Thank you.
Hi, I'm excited to show you the latest Adaptix flat panel X-ray source. Here we have it integrated into a mini C-arm for orthopedic extremity imaging. So this could be used for imaging the hand or the elbow, or turned on its side to image the foot. So compared to our previous demo unit, we have the new casework, the new design, and the vacuum chamber inside the source has been permanently sealed. So you'll see the pinch-off tube there. So to explain what we have here, this is the vacuum chamber. On top of there, we have a low-profile, high-voltage generator. And on the front side, we have an electronics control board that enables us to rapidly switch between the different emitters with no physical movement. On the bottom, we have the dynamic digital X-ray detector. Here we have the control box with a mini computer and a power adapter, and it's all plugged into a normal mains socket. I've taken the front cover off so that you can see the exciting stuff inside. And today we're going to be imaging some antique hand bones. So these are held together with little bits of plastic twine to keep them in position. So I'll place those on the detector. We can go outside of the bunker and we'll start the acquisition. Okay, so we're set up to image a hand, and you'll hear the Geiger counter go in a minute as the emitters fire from lots of different positions, covering lots of different angles. And once we've acquired all of that, we can do some pre-processing and calculate what 3D shape created those shadows. And very soon we'll have a slice through the middle of those bones. Here we are. So you can probably see some of these little lines down the middle. So these are the holes, small holes, sub-millimeter holes that have been drilled through the bones in order to tie them together with some plastic twine to keep the skeleton in shape. That sort of detail you would never see on a 2D X-ray because all of the bony structure is superimposed in 2 dimensions. And when we've given it a little bit more time to calculate, we can then go through the individual slices, going up and down, stopping at areas where we think it's interesting to see the different bones at different levels. So you can see lots of nice details, the sort of spongy trabecular structure in the bones. Okay, so that's hand imaging. We'll go in and then I'll show you foot imaging. So for this, we would rotate the source so that the patient could stand on a block and have the foot at the right level. For now, I'll just stick some antique heel bones onto the detector in about the right position. Okay, so let's head on out. So we're set up for a foot now. We'll repeat the acquisition. Again, you hear the Geiger counter going. We're firing those X-rays from different positions. Again, doing the pre-processing, and then we'll show our first reconstructed slice. The bones we've got there are the calcaneus and the talus, and they have a curved structure in between them, so it can be quite difficult to see the joint space in 2D, whereas when you go through in 3D, you can see that joint space between those two bones in a little bit more detail. One of the benefits of having our flat panel source is that we have a square array of emitters. Most normal tomosynthesis systems either physically move a single source in a line, in an arc, or they have a stationary array of emitters in a line. With ours, we cover a second dimension as well, which gives us a bit more depth resolution. So here we can go through the different slices, different depths through the bone, and you can see that joint, that curved joint space at different depths there. We've taken this system to Surrey Hospital and done X-ray dose and scatter measurements and confirmed that the output is very similar to a normal 2D X-ray. So we've got a system that's low cost, low dose, and offering 3D imaging for a similar cost and dose to 2D X-ray from a system that's truly mobile. Okay, thank you.
So what we're going to do now is to move into a time of Q&A. And as I mentioned earlier, we'd be great if you could do this via Slido. We've had some questions come through already. Easy to use, just go to sli.do and enter the code Adaptix. That's ADAPTIX, and that's all lowercase. But maybe to start off, if we could start with a question for Sian. And Sian, where do you see a device like this fitting in with clinical workflows?
Well, I think this is a very opportune moment for the introduction of such a device as a point of care type device. Dare I say it, the world has changed with the pandemic, and workflow and pathways have changed. So patients are going to be imaged outside of a conventional general X-ray department, outside of a secondary care setting as we see it in the UK, and more at their community base without actually having to come into a secondary care setting. I mean, that is obviously a model that is quite developed in the States, in the fact that patients are imaged in an office type setting. So this would sit perfectly in that type of environment. So we don't want patients coming to hospital, but we want to make sure that they have an accurate diagnosis made. And this would be a low cost and effective way of doing that. And you can imagine that this will be evolved in looking towards the future in things like sports care and pitch side type imaging. So that would be a very valuable tool.
So for those of you who didn't pick up on that, Sian's Welsh and is having a dig at the English rugby. And before we were talking about imaging the body of English rugby by the pitch side. So thanks for that, Sian.
Indeed.
Yes, let's maybe move the conversation back on to imaging tiny gaps between bones rather than massive gaps between skills.
Right. So, Conrad, what's the next?
Sorry. Yeah, maybe just following on about that, Mark. For Sian, then, who do you see as the primary clinical user of the device, Sian? Would it be you as a radiologist or another member of the clinical team?
Well, when you actually look at the device from a sort of expert perspective, what I'm thinking of expert surgeons, that are hand surgeons, foot surgeons, they could easily utilize this device in an office environment. So it makes it easily amenable and adaptable to that. When you're looking at high throughput environments like fracture clinics, where you see a large number of patients, they often have to sort of traverse back and forth to X-ray departments. This is a type of device that you can actually install in a fracture clinic environment. One, it doesn't need the big kit you would normally have to have as a normal standard digital X-ray equipment, but actually would give you accurate and prompt diagnosis of complex things such as scaphoid imaging, which is always, we know, is a challenge to make a diagnosis of a scaphoid fracture, and the sort of health economic benefits of diagnosing that promptly and accurately, or excluding it even promptly, to make sure that patients have the right and appropriate care.
And I think that's maybe one of the key things. I took my son for a suspected foot fracture to an emergency department. We had to have 7 2D X-rays in order to rule out what we thought was the fracture. What we're hoping is that in the future, the time to get that negative diagnosis will be much reduced. We were in with him for about 5 or 6 hours, but also the number of X-rays is reduced and the total dose. So this is very much about that 3D at the point of care to reduce ED crowding and hopefully one day remove that diagnosis from the emergency department to take it elsewhere.
Indeed, yeah, I agree.
Thank you. We're getting quite a few questions starting to come through on Slido. Maybe if we could just pick up some of the technical ones now. So maybe Steve, the question there is how many emitters in your X-ray source? Looks like 64 chips, 60 emitters, but in one video you say 45. Steve.
Yeah, so we have up to 45 emitters. We don't need to fire all of them to create a good image. You can get a perfectly good image from 30 of them, so we have some redundancy built in there.
Okay, great. And then another one maybe for you, Steve, as well. Is the source sealed or does it require a vacuum pump while in operation?
No, it's pinched off. I think that was shown in the video as well. So it's a permanent vacuum seal with a getter inside, so giving us a good long lifetime.
Great. And next one then, again, on those technical ones, what's the tube voltage and the individual emitter current?
So the voltage is 60 kilovolts, so that's typical for used for orthopedic imaging. With tomosynthesis, there are quite a lot of research papers that show that the exact energy is not so critical as it is in 2D X-ray. So having a fixed voltage works fine for tomosynthesis images. The current is dramatically lower than a normal conventional 2D X-ray, but that's because we're imaging in a different way. With a conventional 2D X-ray, you have a single very bright source quite far away from your detector. With ours, we have a square array of emitters that we've brought much closer to the detector. The inverse square law means that if you halve the distance, you only need a quarter of the power. And if you're not firing all your photons at once, but spreading them out over multiple positions, then again, that reduces the current per emitter. So I don't think it's not normally useful to do a sort of direct comparison, but in terms of dose, the photons going through the patient, very similar to 2D X-ray, but we're ending up with a 3D image.
And to build on that approach helps us get a number of different advantages. So this is something you plug into your normal ring main. So you don't need 3-phase power for your imaging. And also because of the approach we take, it also means we don't have as many problems with thermal buildup and similar. So it's a very simple, very elegant system.
Fantastic, okay. And question about the detector specifically. Don't know if you're able to say, Mark, which detector brand we're using and how many frames per second?
So, well, I'd rather not say which detector brand we're using, but what I can say is that there are a large number of different brands we can use. So typically, this requires a dynamic detector. And the detector currently in the orthopedic system is 11, possibly we may be upgrading to slightly larger detectors in other applications and ultimately moving to chest. But the key thing is we can use any dynamic detector, and if we wish to, we could code the source that only worked with a given brand.
Okay, all right, thank you. Now, question, maybe this one's for you as well, Mark. Someone's speculating that the cost of the device is about $300,000. Is that
no, absolutely.
Are we in the right ballpark there?
No, you're not. So the purpose of this is low dose, low cost imaging at the point of care, and you don't do that at $300,000. So the aim is not to go head to head with cone beam CT or similar. The aim is to offer a 3D image at the point of care at a similar price point to the 2D systems. So we would see this much more similar to a low cost small mini C-arm in this application, and when we go to chest, we'd see it about the same price point as a DR cart for chest imaging. So it's very much what we're aiming to give you is 3D instead of 2D at roughly the same price as 2D, and roughly the same dose as 2D. That's really what the technology enables. And when you think about what other portable solutions look like with massive batteries and similar, you can see why we're going to strip the cost out of this system. Low dose, low cost 3D at the point of care.
Great. Okay, maybe do you want to expand a little bit more on how a device like this could actually impact the economics of care?
Well, I think, shall I hand over to Sian to talk about how it might affect the clinical workflow, and then we'll build on that to how it affects the economics. Sian?
Yeah, I mean, the pathways, as I alluded to earlier on, in the fact that COVID has changed the way we think, how we image patients and how we change those pathways coming through to the secondary care setting. So one, you'd utilize this potentially in an outpatient setting, not having patients traveling through a hospital or coming even into hospital. Minor injury units, you could ideally identify some of these fractures in that setting, PACS transmission, somebody could view these images anywhere. So to make an accurate diagnosis and then bring them to the appropriate treatment center to have the appropriate care without avoiding the 5 to 7 hours sitting in an emergency department, as Mark alluded to earlier. So, we've had to change the way we think and the way we run imaging and run emergency care. We can't have patients and people sitting in departments for hours on end, given the transmission issues we've had during the pandemic. And it's made us think in a different way. And people are already taking on board these changes and changing the pathways they work, getting the right test at the right time, at the right place, not congregating in one place to have a diagnosis done in a time inefficient way.
So I think that's the first thing. The value actually that the device offers is the potential to reduce ED crowding. But in terms of what's the economics of that? Well, firstly, you'll get people through your ED faster. You will hopefully reduce the referrals to CT, and that produces a saving in money, but also a saving in dose. And hopefully you'll reduce unnecessary referrals to fracture clinic, which saves clinician time. So that's all the sort of the stuff that you'd hope to see up front. Obviously, the other things that we're concerned about is reducing the amount of unnecessary casts on people, which saves the patient being potentially unable to drive or unable to work, and also saves unnecessary misses in terms of, for instance, misscaphoid fracture, which potentially reduces care to restore, so the therapy to restore the injury, but also potentially litigation afterwards. And given the average cost of a litigation, a payout in the UK is about £40,000, you could see that just one avoided litigation could see this machine pretty much pay for itself. Now, the other thing that we're really excited to look forward to is a change in the business model. And one of the things we're looking to do is to take this to market on a fee per scan basis. And we think that's when the combination of the technology and the business model innovation has the potential to be truly disruptive.
Fantastic. Okay, questions are stacking up on Slido, so let's just go through a few of these. Hopefully you can do those quite quickly. Are we going to seek a 510K clearance or a de novo application? You, Steve?
A 510K clearance. So in terms of the actual images we produce, they're tomosynthesis images. They've been around for a long time. It's just we're making them in a smarter way in a portable form.
Okay. Another one for you, Steve. So question is, common problems with portable, in brackets, desktop devices like this is radiation leak. Have we solved this problem?
Yes. So as I said earlier, a 2D X-ray fires all its photons from far away, very bright. We bring it closer. We need much less power, so the shielding becomes much easier.
Okay. Next one asks, are you developing this system as part of a pure company research, or are you on contract to develop this piece of technology?
No, we are working with Pausch, but we're the sort of driving partner on this. So the initial design of that, the ortho device that you've seen, was done at Adaptix in our Oxford-based research centre. However, we're delighted to be working with Pausch, but fundamentally this is driven by us at Adaptix. It's our mission. With that said, we're really keen to talk with any people who may see novel applications for our source and be able to help us to take this technology to market. So where we are today, the ortho device is ours, we've designed it. Where we could be in the future, come and talk to us, we'd be delighted to talk with you.
Okay, someone's asked if our device has been used in any peer-reviewed studies so far.
Not as yet.
Okay. And then the next one is, will we make a version of our solution sized up for the vet market?
Now,
Yes, we already have. And we already have a vet using it to this at the moment. So it's a slightly larger one. I encourage everyone and their dog to go to our website. There's a page with some nice veterinary images there. It's a slightly different system, works in a slightly different way because dogs and cats tend to have slightly shorter, stubbier legs. So the geometry needs to be a little bit different, but we've produced some very nice vet images.
Nice.
And please do look at them. There's some amazing images. There's rabbit in particular and some of the dog there. One of the things that we're really excited about is the ability to start getting the veterinary images and doing some processing on them to start developing the AI to better identify fractures and abscesses and similar things, because we think that's a great way that we can start off start to develop that particular technology for porting across to human applications.
Right. Okay, and two really related questions about the portability aspects of the device. Could you use one of your systems in an ambulance for curbside imaging? And with the mobility of the system in mind, how do you envisage connecting the imaging with the reporting clinicians, as this may be time critical in its use case?
Well, on the second one, what I'm going to do is pass that across to you, Conrad, to talk about one of the tie-ups with Ambra. But I'll take the first one in terms of ambulatory imaging, and then I'll hand it to Sean while I'm midway. So one of the things we'd be really excited to do is fit that portable imaging device in an ambulance. We think that curbside discharge could be the way forward and really help patients and healthcare economics. The challenge is actually one of regulation, particularly in places like the UK, where ambulance staff aren't trained to use X-ray and the ambulances aren't shielded. Now, the good news is our low-dose, low-flux system will reduce in a limited shielding burden for ambulances, but there's still quite a few things to get to do before you'd see it routine on ambulances. It is entirely possible. In Germany in particular, they have small CT scanners in ambulances. So it could undoubtedly be a way to go forward. But it's going to take a couple of years to get the clinical community ready to move on that. Sian, any thoughts?
Yeah, and I think you alluded to what I was thinking around. CT imaging is already available for stroke in an ambulance setting. And, you know, the transposability of such a technology as this into a ambulance setting would be far easier than it is for CT, and diagnosing patients before they hit the hospital so that they're directed to the right care, to the right place, and avoiding this, what I call crowding in the initial place. I mean, you can see that workflow being beneficial to both hospital and economics, but also obviously to the patients having the right treatment.
Conrad, do you want to talk to the Ambra deployment that we're currently?
Yeah, really briefly, because we're almost out of time. So as part of building this system, we're working with Ambra to integrate the image workflow so that as soon as our devices image them, they're then transferred to the Ambra cloud. This opens up a whole range of possibilities then to distribute these to PACS for remote review, reporting, AI-generated overlays, etc. So lots of opportunity in the future that opens up.
Fantastic. Now, everyone, thank you very much for joining us. Unfortunately, we're coming to the end. What I hope you've seen is the excitement around low-dose, low-cost point-of-care imaging, potentially with new business models on fee per scan, and also how that could affect patient care. So we are full of exciting things. We've got some great things going on, and we very much hope we'll be back to talk to you next year to show you the next generation of technologies that we're developing at Adaptix. Thank you very much for your time. And the most important thing is do get in touch with us. We're from the industry. We appreciate your perspective, and we would very much love to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.